We're going to do a thing that's a little bit more analogous, actually, to some of the illicit history segments. We're going to get into this deep history of the opioid crisis. We're going to break it up into chapters, but let's just do a little preface here. I actually liked what we were talking about this on the phone the other night, and you were saying that partially what this fits into, and partially what Trump actually tapped into, is that the crisis in America, and it always has been in some ways, but it's so bifurcated right now, and that the opioids tracks with the fact that a lot of America actually really is in like carnage.
There are pockets of carnage where the numbers, first off, the opioid epidemic is off the charts. It does not even compare to heroin crises of the past, and even just, it is on a magnitude greater than the so-called crack epidemic. It's killing now more people than guns and suicide. It is really astronomical, and that's just the deaths. The sort of ongoing carnage of lives destroyed by it, is even greater. But it really is a crisis that is happening in very specific pockets of the country, and pockets that are interestingly don't really get a lot of places like Staten Island here in New York City is the forgotten borough in rural New Hampshire, and then of course it's really hit hardest in Appalachia and Ohio in those areas. So it is a crisis that sort of in the last year everyone has woken up to. And it is what I'd like to attempt to do today is to try to draw a through line for people to try to understand how we got here.
Yeah.
And it's a through line that kind of starts in Apocalypse Now, goes weirdly through Afghanistan, the Temple of Dendor at the Met, which is a crazy connection we'll talk about later, through El Chapo, and ending up here through the boardrooms of Big Pharma, of course. And now,
So that the political frame of it, before we get into it, I just really like that the way you put it, though, is like, and of course, like it goes without saying that, of course, Trump and the Republican, these people, it's a lie. They don't care. It's a scam. But that when the response, and we critique this a lot on this show, when the response to him saying something like that, like we're in carnage, is to be like, well, if factually that's not true. Because
Middle class.
He is speaking to a very real, and that of course doesn't obscure, like of course there's a racial hypocrisy that when there was a crack epidemic, we racialized it and there was no interest in treating people, let alone the underlying conditions. It was all racial war, of course. But to pretend that this isn't a real thing that he's articulating is inhumane and foolhardy.
Yep, and I think it's also tied. The other, interesting part about it, and we'll hopefully end up getting to it when we get to this, build our way back up. But it is also tied to the economic situation and the stagnant wages and the sort of hopelessness. You can't. What's so interesting about drugs is you can't separate them from the socioeconomic conditions by which people become addicted to drugs and the hopelessness of why you end up, snorting OxyContin when in a hollow in Kentucky.
You create a condition where that's a rational response, not a right response, but that's a completely understandable response to the reality you live in. And that's what we miss. So let's go to chapter 1.
Yes.
We're back in Laos, the 1960s, the poppy fields. Start us.
So everyone knows about the Vietnam War, and if you even watched Ken Burns' Vietnam, you'd probably learn a lot about it. But even in that series, no one really talked about what was happening in Laos. There was an entire other conflict connected but separate from the war in Vietnam. There was a separate communist insurgency happening in neighboring Laos. And the United States had various treaties that prevented it from actually putting troops on the ground. And it was a situation where Johnson didn't want to get bogged down in another ground war. So basically, this was really one of the CIA's first major counterinsurgency operations. A handful of dudes went up into the mountains in Laos and started fighting a secret, dirty war against the communist insurgents. They teamed up with a local warlord or tribal leader or whatever you want to call him, named Vang Pao, who was kind of a hero of the resistance to
Matt's
the colonial
really into
powers.
his work.
Vang Pao.
Matt's a big Vang Pao fan. He actually asked if we could get a picture of him.
Oh,
for the
he's
logo.
a badass looking dude.
Yeah, no, I buy it.
So Vang Pao had a fairly cohesive group of fighters, the Hmong Hill people, they're called, in the Aleutian Highlands. And the CIA, led by this guy named Tony Poe, who was this World War II fighter pilot, legendary, part of this first wave of CIA commando dudes that Dulles brought on really, to fight these dirty wars in the secret. And he basically went into business with Vang Pao. It just so happened that Vang Pao, what people grew in this area was the opium poppy.
Yeah.
So as this secret war progressed and more arms and more planes started flying in, Vang Pao started utilizing the transport planes that were bringing arms, which was run by a secret, not so secret actually, but an airline called Air America, which was a front company pretty well known for the CIA, that moved material and troops and other things all across Southeast Asia.
Like the CIA is like official, unofficial airline.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Like I had my father-in-law was working for USIA, and he went on a mission up in Thailand to do a study on democracy, and Air America flew him up there, So there's
full service firm. Drop the kid off, study some democracy, take some heroin, and the other shipment. Yep.
What evolved was essentially a symbiotic relationship between this secret war effort and Vang Pao, where he basically to the point where he started realizing that they were flying these planes back to bases in South Vietnam and other parts of Southeast Asia, and there were a huge potential customer base in the GIs fighting this war, who, again, what are the conditions in which they were fighting this war? Desperate. All they wanted to do was get away from the current situation they were in. So it created this vicious cycle where Vang Pao's heroin was making its way to the troops. The troops were getting hooked in country, and then they began flying it back. And it became increasingly a giant operation, which in turn connected him to Vang Pao, to the CIA-connected guys who were involved in the French Connection, which had been using Turkish connections from the Fertile Crescent to bring in heroin, and now they connected with the gangsters, Sicilian gangsters, to start bringing it into New York and other places.
And this is like the 60s, 70s,
this is
like the heroin blow up.
68, yep. So this leads us to 1970, 71, where there's a major, all these GIs are coming back hooked. You have everyone's seen American Gangster.
Yeah, this is also the Frank Lucas story.
Frank Lucas.
Right.
And it became the rise, actually, of the first big black gangsters, because prior to this, the Italian mob had really controlled the drug trade. There's a myth, if you watch The Godfather, that the mob didn't touch drugs. That's all a lie. They touched drugs. They wouldn't allow it in their own neighborhoods.
Right.
But a lot of their money came from drugs that it always had, So Tony Poe is this really interesting character who, in the end, broke with Vang Pao, because he saw that Vang Pao was just really becoming a gangster and not really committed enough to killing communists. And Tony Poe kind of went crazy and left and literally went up the river and basically became the character by which Marlon Brando is based on in Apocalypse Now. Of course, the whole story is based upon Joseph Conrad,
right?
But the actual character that Brando plays is based upon Tony Poe. He went up the river, went crazy, got his own little militia, married a local princess, and kind of. So that's an incredible story.
So that is an unbelievable story. So we have the first heroin,
That's the first
and
wave.
that leads to just the broader black mafia, a certain type of musical sound,
police corruption,
right? All the stuff that people see. Serpico,
By 1971, the police, they say, in New York City, were actually the biggest heroin. They actually took over and had made this huge bust of the French Connection heroin, but were replacing it with flour and selling it on the streets. It was actually the biggest theft. One single theft in American history was the police stealing $70 million worth of heroin from their own police locker and selling it on the streets. And that was the corruption that Serpico was talking about. And it really had a devastating effect on the police, and it had obviously a devastating effect on the black community. And that was really the first heroin
and across
epidemic.
the whole, I mean, and that's so that's leading. Okay, so that's the first heroin epidemic.
So
let's go.
So chapter 2.
Yeah, I was going to just say chapter 2.
Chapter 2, you have to kind of rewind a little bit and set the stage of what's happening in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan has another crazy Cold War related story. Is in the 1950s, Afghanistan is this incredible sort of new great game battleground of influence between the Soviets and Eisenhower. And Eisenhower goes in and launches a gigantic public works program. They give hundreds of millions of dollars worth of aid to Afghanistan. Basically, modern Afghanistan as we know it today, the highways, the dams, the irrigation systems were completely built by American aid money. And the Soviets also too, but the highways and the ring road around Kabul, whole cities were really built in this effort to, get Afghanistan to be, on our side and not a non-aligned or a Soviet-aligned country. And in the process, by creating this massive industrial agriculture system, they ended up changing the salinity of the soil, by which it created the perfect conditions to grow the opium poppy. So
that's unbelievable.
Opium poppies had always been, grown in Afghanistan. But after
it's
that,
like traffickers. Thanks,
yeah.
Appreciate it,
so
guys.
This is another amazing blowback. You can thank the Cold War.
But that's like literally a blowback.
Yeah,
I like that. That's like the physical manifestation of blowback.
So simultaneously, as you have Vang Pao becomes the largest heroin producer in the world, thanks to the CIA. Simultaneously, the what's called the Fertile Crescent up there in Afghanistan, Iran. Afghanistan starts slowly, the opium poppy becomes an increasingly important crop for various local warlords. And as we get into the 70s and the war of the Mujahideen against the Soviets, the Mujahideen in part are funding their operations by selling opium. And
through, of course, like the 80s and early 90s,
exactly.
and that connects with ISI stuff, with the Pakistani intelligence, and we're doing our usual thing, where we're just we're either actively complicit or in the most like sympathetic scenario to U.S. foreign policy, just being like, what are we going to do? This is how our allies are going to make money. Let's just not look at it.
So after the Soviets pull out, Afghanistan is a wasteland, and there's different warlords, are fighting for control throughout the 90s, and that's how you see the rise of the Taliban. Now, the rise of the Taliban is a really interesting story, which I found out there's a lot of myths about the Taliban.
Let me just pause you for a second. So the story that I've heard with the Taliban, and this might be one of the myths that's broken up by you, is that in 1996, when they rose to power, that they basically, and they come into a country that literally is like Kabul's like seesawing almost month to month between guys that are willing to shell an entire city to have, the level of warlordism and disregard for human rights in Afghanistan is like, at the time was exceptional, and depressingly is a precursor for a lot of stuff we see today.
Yeah.
They came into power, and the story of their founding mythology is that these young religious students who are really tough, and they're trained in Pakistani schools, and they're also trained, in like the Pashto fighting traditions, right? That there's a young woman who's murdered and raped by a warlord. Right. They come in and they basically hang the guys.
This is the legend of
and the legend is that they came in.
They were the new sheriff in town.
And they also caught the eye in the beginning of American foreign policymakers. The Saudis loved them, and oil companies here loved them because the idea was that these guys might whip the place into shape.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's and so part of what they did after 96 up into 98, 99 is promote an idea to the world that they were cracking down on the growing of opium poppy.
Right. And of course, that heroin. If women can't, wear anything, if there's no television, no music, of course you'd have to crack down on heroin, right?
So it was forbidden to use. It was locally. They had provisions though that allowed them to sell it to foreigners, and that in turn, caused a huge. They were really slipping it out the back door to Pakistan, and there's a huge heroin epidemic that really emerges in Pakistan. But leading up into the year 2000, they even got the UN and the United States to give them all this money and give them like little, a merit badge for cracking this major crackdown on the growing of opium poppy. The reality is something much different.
Right.
What they did was actually brilliant, which was what they were seeing was there was actually becoming a glut of heroin on the market. There actually wasn't a huge demand. At that point, heroin was not really.
Well, that's the question I have. So, because my perception is that starting certainly in the 80s, but also through the 90s, the heroin became a much less trendy drug.
In the early 90s, it was. I mean, the heroin chic and all of that.
Heroin chic came, but 90s, not in the 80s, but early 90s. Not 2000
heroin use like in Europe and the US was going down. So they sort of saw that there was actually a glut and the price was really low. So what they did was they confiscated all of this heroin. They made some, for the cameras, they burnt a couple piles here and there. Right. But really what they were doing were stockpiling. So after...
strategic heroin reserve.
Yeah,
Guys,
exactly.
Can I get another beer, please? Thanks.
So after 9/11, when the U.S. invades, it becomes a huge benefit for them to help in the war effort. And ever since then, basically, you look at 9/11 and you look at the global output of heroin to the world, it is a hockey stick.
Yeah.
It is Afghanistan has more than anything, Afghanistan has become a narco state, and the Taliban have essentially become just no different from the Sinaloa cartel. They pretty much have lost their religion. They don't really care about religion that much anymore. They're basically, and what's really interesting is it's not just the Taliban. One of the biggest players in this game was Hamid Karzai's brother. Ahmed Karzai really controlled the movement. He wasn't a grower, but he was the governor of Hamid province. So Helmand province. Sorry.
Helmand province.
Helmand's
Right.
province. So
I got you.
he controlled. Nothing moved without his okay, right? And that was completely known by the CIA. He was on the CIA payroll because they were trying to use him because he was also dealing with the Taliban. So they're trying to use him to get the Taliban. So, in part in doing my series on America's War on Drugs, we talked to DEA guys who were like, this was a major battle between these two agencies. And that tension between the CIA and the DEA is a story that, I heard multiple times and in multiple places. So that is one part of the story of this global rise of heroin. Chapter 3.
Well, before we get to Chapter 3, I just want to take a brief moment. I want to remind myself that Nation of Islam Obama issuing a fatwa that you can sell heroin to infidels is absolutely a future sketch on this show. I just want to index that. I think that's brilliant. Like, according to Hadith, the animal could take it. I want to do it like Obama could have the Godfather scene. Let white people take the drugs. They have no souls. Let them poison themselves. They have no souls anyway. Does Chapter 3 take us to the corporate connection
Yes.
yet? Okay,
exactly.
So I want to set that up because I just think that Chapter 3 is fascinating because we have the connection between underworld and overworld that always gets exposed in UN's foreign policy and the CIA.
Yeah.
But now when we're talking about opioids, we realize that, and I think you'd be careful. Like in my field and my politics, I'm always talking about the criminality of capitalism, the cruelty of corporations. And, and at times I think you have to be careful and not be hyperbolic. So a company could be disgusting and destroy many lives. but they are not literally a organized crime outfit
Right.
in the sense that we use it.
Right.
When we get to opium or opioids, we really have to start looking at pharma and these companies as like, there is not. We could start using
what
the
is the
most
difference? I know.
we could use the most hyperbolic language in a way that's simply accurate. So take us to chapter 3.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point,
Yeah.
I'll go into. I mean,
Yeah.
if you ask any pharmacologist or any neuroscientist, they will tell you the difference between OxyContin and heroin that you buy on the street is basically just two things. Number one, it's a lot more pure and it's better.
The OxyContin.
OxyContin,
Right,
yeah.
right, right. Yeah,
The
yeah.
shit you buy on the street is like could be adulterated with anything. It could kill you, and it's probably is a lot less potent. Though now it's gotten very potent because there's lots of synthetics that are mixed in. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But
With Sinaloa.
but secondly, really the only other difference is it's just formulated in a sort of slow release format. And it's just a different delivery system, right? It is literally the same. It's not like, some of these where, Adderall is very, very similar to meth, right?
Right.
But it is
It's
a different
not
drug.
the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
Right.
This is, if you ask any pharmacologist, there is not a big difference between what it's doing to your brain when you take OxyContin and when you take heroin. It's just how it's delivered, how quick it hits you, all those things. But it's hitting the same parts of your brain.
Right.
It's doing the same things. So
chapter 3, the corporate
chapter
connection.
3 in the Temple of Dendor. That's my favorite part of it.
I love it.
So basically, there's a company called Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and they were run for years by a family called the Sacklers, and they were a guy who they're not the founder of this epic family legacy was basically a marketing guy who was a genius in writing. He was really like the Don Draper of pharmaceutical marketing. He was the guy who invented the idea of marketing directly to physicians in journals where you could. So he was, and so during the 1970s, he was writing the marketing copy for Valium that got literally a generation hooked on Valium. They would have ads in magazines with like college freshmen saying basically, the pressures of her first year can be overwhelming. Valium is the answer for, like every college freshman should have a Valium on hand to get them over, the finals jitters, and the social pressures of freshman year. I mean, so this guy was, coming out of this marketing genius, he ended up taking over a small, somewhat random pharmaceutical company called Purdue that was like making laxatives or something. And they ended up coming up with a morphine pill, which again is basically, morphine, heroin, OxyContin, all the same thing, all coming from the opium poppy derivative, all having a similar effect in the body. But then in
so this is the pivot.
Yeah, the pivot was
a pivot from laxatives to heroin.
And then
I've got the copy written.
Yeah, and then they basically realized that the big problem with these pills were that you would have to take a lot of them. And it was if you're dealing with pain management. Usually, traditionally opioids were used for post-surgery pain management. When you're in a lot of pain, you had a hip transplant, and so they're very hard because they went fairly quick. Their big, invention was to figure out a way to make it a sort of time-release pill, and they claimed.
And this is OxyContin.
That is OxyContin.
Okay.
Again, not a big difference to any of the other pills that have been out there. But they marketed it as a 12-hour pill that you could take at night and then get up in the morning. And for the most part, it sort of worked. Now, anyone who knows anything about opioids and heroin or anything is you develop a resistance or what's the word I'm looking for?
Tolerance.
Thank you. Tolerance to these things very quickly.
Right.
I mean, there are people. You can take, if you're a virgin to it, you take 2 pills and be looped off your head. I have friends who had surgery and got hooked and were taking 30, 40 pills a day, right?
Yep.
You can, the limits of your body, when it starts numbing your endorphin receptors, right? So what happens is people started to really realize that it didn't really last for 12 hours. And they also realized that if you ground it up, and it literally, this was the crazy part, on their the label, it said, warning, don't grind this up because it will make it super powerful and may kill you. Which of course is
which is literally like the instruction right. And so at the same time, they're also pioneering the methodology of the
marketing. Right?
Yeah, the marketing.
So they have armies.
So they've done the tech.
Right.
And the tech is make this the most pleasurable, deliverable, addictive, and now let's not just sort of, say like, hey, this is available for people with surgery. Right. Let's get this out there.
So they have, they really perfected having an army of marketers, particularly young, cute women, going around the country giving, first ones free, like every classic cliche drug dealer, giving out free samples to physicians, figuring out all these like weasel words to get around the fact that, saying it's virtually non-addictive and things like that. Like literally having a manual of things to legally say, even though anyone who knows anything about opioids and opium and heroin, it is some of the most addicting substances on earth.
Right.
I mean, really, if you get down to it, drugs like cocaine, frankly, are not technically addictive. Psychologically, you can get addicted to it, and you can feel like shit if you don't get some coke if you start doing it for a while.
But heroin and opioids have a different. They have like a literal physiological. You can almost
die by coming down off the pain involved. If you are a serious heroin addict, can in fact kill some people, and it is some of the most when you're severely addicted, coming down off it and getting off it can be some of those painful things you will ever do. So they launch this massive marketing campaign, and then you have a number of states with very loose laws around how prescriptions and doctors work together. Florida being the most egregious example. Florida, basically, anyone can open up a doctor's office and a pharmacy in the same building and not have any medical training yourself.
Right.
So basically what you have is this explosion of what are called pill mills, where they have these, the famous one are these 2 brothers who start these pill mills called American Pain, and they have like scores of. They're basically.
It sounds like such a bad 90s kind of American Pain. Blah, 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 blah.
They were basically these jacked up steroid heads who realized there's incredible, and they had the doctors literally their hands were cramping. So they gave them stamps to sign it. The average meeting with the doctor was under 3 minutes. Right. And they had at one point they had a mobile MRI in the parking lot of a strip club where you could go, and they ended and they in the basically it was I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the number the astronomically the number of prescriptions that were given or pills that were dispensed in Florida vastly outstripped the rest of the country. Right. So you had people all over the eastern seaboard driving down to Florida, buying these up, and there became a robust black market for in the early 2000s for OxyContin pills.
And this is all coming through Purdue and through the Sackler family. Exactly. Now then there's 2 other pieces that I want to get to with the Sacklers. The Met connection that you've been teasing. And then also I'll just give this tease. One of the great sleaze bags of American political history.
Well. God, how can we almost forget him?
Yeah.
So the Sacklers, at the same time, they are literally revolutionizing the marketing of heroin, essentially, in pill form. They are also one of the country's biggest benefactors. They're somewhat like the Kochs, you know.
Right.
They literally are the Sackler wing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art is where the Temple of Dendor is.
Yep.
You know, amazing colonial plunder.
Yep.
And many other institutions of higher learning and museums have Sackler wings and Sackler this and Sackler. I mean, they have given
I've definitely seen a Sackler wing. I don't even remember where, but I've definitely seen that name somewhere.
A lot of wings. And at the same time, they are like many other companies, like the tobacco industry and others, when they're under fire, hire high-priced former political hitmen to try to mitigate some of the increasing number of lawsuits by state attorney generals, attorneys general, and individuals who are suing them for negligence and for pushing these pills. And of course, one of those is probably one of your favorite mayor in mine.
Oh yeah,
Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, it's great. Rudy Giuliani, who I mean, I wasn't here. I wasn't 18 yet, but I have a memory of Rudy. And the thing that I tell people, I guess everybody knows he's a scumbag now, just from present exposure.
Oh, and Bernie Carrick was part of it too.
Oh, and Bernie Carrick.
Yes.
You should remind everybody who Bernie Carrick was. I'll just say, among many things about Rudy Giuliani, this was a guy who, after I think it was Abner Louima, was killed by New York police officers. He was supposedly, was reaching for a wallet. They pumped him with like over 30 bullets. He said there was a leak inside his administration of this guy's juvenile record, which had nothing to, beyond nothing to do. That was one case. And then another case where I think Giuliani personally said of somebody else, maybe the same guy, could be mixing up cases, he wasn't a choir boy.
Right.
This is after he's killed unarmed by the police.
Yeah.
There were record, accusations. So this guy also built his career on prosecuting drug cases.
On drug cases, exactly.
Right. So and then Bernie Carrick was
a former police chief who was disgraced and did time in prison.
He did time in prison, yep.
For various things, one of which was he was using an apartment over the World Trade Center, wreckage for basically
to fuck his book agent.
Yeah, to basically to bang his book agent.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be used for first responders to get a break.
He probably considered himself a first responder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm getting a break, and I'm a first responder, fucking my book agent. Great.
So what you have,
I love when these people are out there that remind you, even if you can be a little shady. You're like, wow, I'm actually a pretty good person. Some people out there doing some real scumbag shit, man. If you read about Giuliani and those people, you're like, these are just really bad humans. Yeah. So Giuliani and Bernie Carrick, they're doing consulting.
They're helping them out, fight all this stuff. Finally, around 2010-ish, they finally get Purdue. Purdue starts losing its copyright on it. It's part of it. But they also get Purdue to change it so that you can't break up the pill into powder form and snort it. They put it in a little jelly form. It makes it harder.
So they restricted their free market activity there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and they
totally unfair.
And they start, states start cracking down. They start putting some of these pill mill guys and the American Pain guys go to prison. Doctors are getting busted for. So what happens is, it really contracts this black market. You can't go in and just get a script really easily anymore.
Right.
And around the same time, another thing is happening.
This is about to be Chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
So, but just really quickly before we get to Chapter 4, are the heirs to this Sackler fortune? Could we have run into them in any obnoxious Williamsburg parties or anything?
Well, that's what's interesting about them is they keep super on the DL.
I would too.
Are
all of the largesse was built on mass scale human misery. Yeah. I would be like, man.
One of them is a Brooklyn artist, but
nailed it.
He denies having any of profiting at all somehow from all this. The other
I don't profit. I just have a couple of brownstones and pursuing my music. Prick.
They
trust funds and inheritance should be abolished. Period. Let alone from that. But anyways, yeah. I'm sure the guy's music is great.
Yeah, I'm sure it's good.
If he did like heroin music, that would be cool. If he did like 70s style, like he wrote like odes to Frank Lucas and stuff. Yeah. He just did like heroin beats. Now, at least he would have a sense of irony, but he probably does like sad stuff about breaking up with MFA students or something. I'm just assuming this guy's garbage. Okay, chapter 4. I could be wrong. He could be a great guy. Could be a great.
Exactly.
Oh, you have met them at Williamsburg bad parties, haven't you? Look at Anthony. No comment.
I'm not gonna comment on someone I don't know.
Hey, look. Right. Heroin heirs. No, I'm just kidding. They're not bringing us their best. No, I'm just joking. I'm totally joking. So, but more importantly than the people, the joking aside, their largesse is institutionally all over the place.
It's all over the
place. And that is relevant.
It's like they're like exactly.
So chapter 4.
Chapter 4
begins actually with a little bit of good news.
Well, So there's a somewhat tragic and paradoxical outcome of one of the more positive trends that we've had in this country over the last decade, which is the legalization of pot in various states, from recreational to medicinal use. So what a lot of people don't realize about the Mexican cartels is up until this point, we're talking in 2008, 2009, 2010, up to 30 to 40% of their profits were made from pot. Mexican weed really was like a lot of the southern parts of the country were inundated with Mexican weed. The Durango around in province, there's huge, traditional pot trade. There was a lot of pot was grown in the Mexican mountains, and it would make its way to the United States. Almost overnight, the legalization of pot and just the growth of the indoor movement, and also just the quality of American pot, right, just goes through the roof. And the cartels are not.
They take a hit.
They take a huge hit. Their weed sucks, basically.
Right.
And they can't compete.
And going back to high school, everybody was like, oh, is that Mexican weed? That's terrible. Right.
Yeah. They never was. It was always quantity over quality when it came to Mexican weed.
Was like Walmart weed.
Yeah. So these guys were not artisans. Let's put it that way when it came to weed.
They were not. Not fair
tequila,
trade. Definitely not.
Mezcal, they were a little.
Oh, that's their specialty.
They're better at it. Right. So what happens is, the cartels are like, well, all right, we're not going to just lose 30 to 40% of our profits. Let's, pivot to video.
Exactly.
So they literally almost overnight, ramp up, because there's also parts of Mexico are great for opium poppy as well. And they always had Mexican black tar heroin. There was always, a heroin trade and growth of the opium poppy in Mexico.
But they get a lot more serious about improving the quality and the purity.
And they really take a page out of the Sackler-Purdue book, and they launch essentially a gigantic marketing campaign where they send the different cartels, mostly Sinaloa.
That is El Chapo's cartel.
Exactly.
And this is a cartel that, with at least, again, they're complicit. United States and Mexican governments had let Sinaloa dominate. Similarly, if you follow like the Cali cartel in Colombia in the 80s and 90s, there was a perception that, these guys are a little more reasonable. Right. They're a little bit less violent, which is an extremely relative way of putting it. And they were certainly, both through corruption and through just sort of political calculations, allowed to rise.
Right. They were theoretically like, say, the Taliban back in the day, like they could be the sheriffs and be the big dogs and keep Mexico from becoming a war of all against 10 cartels. They were the mega cartel at that point. So they were pretty much El Chapo's in the right place at the right time to capitalize on this massive demand, where you had all these pockets around the country where people were all, in a matter of a year or so, cut off from their supply of pills. So the cartels sent out representatives and they started, really good quality heroin, and went out, and guys basically were like, okay, pills, the price for pills were going up to like $50 a pill, or you could get a bag of heroin for $20, right? So all of a sudden you have this flip-flop from pills to heroin, and the cartels are just massively taking advantage of this. And, people who are hooked were somewhat, just basically pawns in their hands because they were, physically addicted to this drug. And it happened, in somewhat quietly. Again, going back to your opening point, in places that, are
the peripheries.
Yeah, we're not seeing that happening. When I live in Manhattan and I'm covering the stuff, you're not seeing it. It's happening to Italian guys in Long Island and in Staten Island. It's happening to the sons of former coal miners in Kentucky, and guys who, used to work in the kids whose parents worked in the factories that closed down in Ohio. So all these, and you can look at where these pockets of heroin have come up, and it really does track where your unemployment, desperation, the post-industrial economy, kind of hit hard. So that is basically the situation that leads us up to our current situation.
And then let's do a little chapter 5. So that means that, taking us back to the beginning, that means that, again, and it's totally cynical and totally racist, but whether we're talking about the way Breitbart turned the cartel wars into like a, xenophobic day-by-day, minute-by-minute tabloid coverage. You see hints of it on Fox News, but it's really perfected in that Breitbart model, like I think in really like 2014, 2015. And all of this stuff that Trump was talking about, people identified the xenophobia, they identified the racism, but they were definitely disconnected, just as they were, of course, disconnected from the larger reality that neoliberal economics was not working, that the recovery was a complete fantasy for most people, that the recovery money was massively disproportionate in terms of where it went on the economic scale. So that then you have this, a con man can come along but articulate a reality that nobody else is articulating.
Yep.
And that's where we're at.
Yep. So
like then in this moment now, like actually, of course, once he's in office, he's cutting funding to treat opioids.
Right.
There isn't
Kushner, and that's one of his
many.
That's his part of his portfolio is to solve the opioid crisis.
Has
he done it yet? Is he on it?
I think he's a little bit.
I think
behind. As soon as Israeli-Palestinian peace is established, which is probably another week or so, and then he got to sort of like smooth some things out with China. Yeah, then we'll be on the opioid crisis.
Right. Right. I think he was like revolutionizing something else. What was the other thing he was doing?
Something about computers or some shit. Do we have that sound drop of him? Wait, we have a Kushner. I have never seen, like, my experience of Jared Kushner is being completely ready to be completely less than unimpressed by him. And then the extent to which I've been unimpressed by him still exceeded my already completely contemptuous, scumbag trust fund baby.
He had it going so well when he didn't say anything, and then these little clips of him, and you hear what a weenie he is, and like what just an idiot that he, it's just like. You had it. You were playing it so smart. He had that self-awareness to not
do this.
Yeah, to not whatever he's about to say.
It's working, and it's very exciting.
He looks a bit Wallace and Gromit when he says that, actually.
He looks a bit inbred when he says that, actually.
It's working, and it's very exciting.
I think the brilliant thing, I think what actually might have gotten him to talk was the money move that John Oliver did, where he dubbed like a 2010 interview with Gilbert Gottfried. Do we still have that? I think if we could find that would be incredible. It's like Kushner sitting in that like stilted weird way of his on like CNBC or something, explaining like, his brilliant move to like own the New York Observer or whatever nonsense expedition that he was on. Like the money has fried his brain, and still like kissing and calling his dad daddy. And he said, and he goes, he's like, he just said something like, I've invested in real estate and a variety of other blah blah blah. Oh yeah, we have this. Let's enjoy this for a moment. I think this forced Jared to speak, and Gottfried was actually better.
My main business is real estate, and I also own a newspaper and some other websites and online media businesses.
You don't know for a fact that is not his actual voice.
He sure is pretty, though. I mean, look at that.
You think so?
He's pretty good. He's pretty.
Oh, we have different perceptions. All right, everybody. We are going to go to the post game. That was the treatment.
We did it.
We did it. We
did
nailed it.
Yeah.
We did it.
We even added another bonus chapter.
We
I only
absolutely
had
did.
4.
We fucking nailed it.
You went to 5.
We did it. It's working, and it's very exciting.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos